The midterm elections, well, they're just 200 days away. And Democrats, they're strategizing about how they can take back the House. Now, do they talk about gun control across the board? How about a more piecemeal approach? How about impeachment? Do they even mention the I word? Now, those just a couple of the pressing questions facing the party as a whole. Now, earlier today, I spoke with someone who knows quite a bit about Democratic politics, Steve Israel, Congressman representing Long Island, and he also is chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. He is also the author of a new novel. It's called Big Guns. Author. Congressman, how you doing?
It's better than being a congressman. Life is good.
I can tell you, I've spoken to a lot of your former colleagues, and they all say, you know, the guy who's figured it out is Israel. You know, he still gets he does the TV thing, he gets to write, he doesn't have to raise money anymore. He's figured it out.
Well, the not raising money part is the best part about it. I feel like I've been liberated from being a panhandler in Congress.
Well, certainly in your novel, you don't spare your former gig, and moreover, you don't spare special interests. Let me set up the premise for Big Guns. Tell me if I got it right. There's more shooting tragedies that happen, and finally, the mayor in Chicago has had it, and there's a counteroffensive from the NRA and the gun lobby, and somehow, some way, a small-town mayor, I'm going to try and pronounce the fictional of Azabog, maybe close enough, in Long Island.
That's pretty good. That's good.
Thank you.
Yes.
She says no guns at all. And then somehow, some way, that becomes ground zero for this national fight and actually a move to mandate that there has to be gun ownership for every adult in the country.
That's exactly right. That's the premise. And it's based on truth. You know, after the Sandy Hook massacre, I saw the President of the United States in the White House press room, tears streaming from his eyes, and I believe that that was the point where Congress would finally act. After every single mass shooting, people would say to me, when will Congress do something? And my answer was usually never. But at that point, I thought Congress would act. In fact, not only did Congress do nothing, but the little city of Nelson, Georgia, and this is hard to believe, but it is a fact, the little city of Nelson, Georgia moved in the opposite direction. They passed a local ordinance requiring every resident to carry a gun. And all satire, Richard, has to have a kernel of truth. That was my kernel of truth. I amplified it in this snarky, satirical book where Congress tries to pass a new law requiring that every American own and carry a gun with sensible waivers for children under the age of 7.
You know, this hour, Congressman, I'm going to be talking with both the father who lost his son in Newtown. He's now suing Alex Jones for horrible things that InfoWars and friends have spread about not only his son, that it was some fake actor-driven tragedy that was Sandy Hook, but also I was at Plain Edge High School out on the island with an amazing group of kids, the police commissioner, the principal, the superintendents, teachers, and everyone involved. I don't know, this time around, and I was down in D.C. for the March for Our Lives rally, it feels different. Am I just being Pollyannish here, or is there, even with all the cynicism, any chance that something will come out of this?
You know, it does feel different, and I think it feels different for a variety of reasons, and then I'll talk about what these young people need to do, in my view. First of all, it feels different because these kids aren't giving up. I was in Florida just a week ago and saw some of these young students, and they said, you know, we know what's going to happen. Congress is going to, they're just going to try and wait us out, and the gun lobby, they're going to wait us out. We're not going anywhere. Secondly, these kids go home. You know, I used to chair, as you know, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and my theory was, put data aside, put polling aside, when an issue becomes a dinner-time conversation, that's what shapes elections. So when these kids are raising the issue of gun violence with their parents, and their parents are driving them to these rallies, that's what shapes the narrative going into this midterm election. And so I think there's a difference. Having said that, I think that these marches and demonstrations can't be confined to Washington, D.C. or Times Square in New York City. They've got to go into the congressional districts that are really competitive in this midterm election and could be the difference between a lapdog of the gun lobby and somebody who will vote for sensible, reasonable gun safety. And there are about 15 of those districts in this election. These kids go to Florida not to wear flip-flops, but to flip a district. They're going to make a difference.
You know, in your book, Big Guns, it's clear that the gun lobby has tremendous sway. I can never figure it out. And listen, I know the math involved, I know the districts, but when 97% of Americans want universal background checks, how much real political courage does it take to go against them? Isn't it good politics?
You just asked, I think, the most fundamentally important question of this debate. You know, there's this misconception that the gun lobby has all this money and that its PAC buys the votes of members of Congress. That's just not true. The gun lobby doesn't spend a lot of money re-electing members of Congress or electing its friends. It's a matter of something you know a lot about, Richard. It's called voter intensity. And so let me break it down for you based on conversations I would have with members of Congress who'd vote against things like no-fly, no-buy or universal background checks. We'd go into the members-only elevator and they'd shake their heads and they'd say, you know, boy, I feel miserable having voted against those things. And I would say, well, why did you vote against these things? And this was the response. Because when I go home, if I lose my NRA voters, I lose my election. This is about voter intensity. People who have that bumper sticker that says, I'm NRA and I vote, this is true. This is literal. They vote on that one issue. The rest of the country, they may want a member of Congress who's going to support universal background checks, but they also cast their vote based on so many other things. When voter intensity shifts from the gun lobby to protecting our children in schools, that will begin to change elections, and that's going to change the law.
Well, let me ask you to look on the other side of the aisle, to your former Democratic colleagues. Would they be wise or foolish to make guns an election issue this fall, let alone talking about impeachment or these things? There's a fissure not just on the right, but even on the left with a lot of the progressives who say, my party left me. How, as the former DCCC head, how would you tell these guys to navigate this? Is it district by district, or does a party have to have a platform?
No, no, the party does not have to have a one-size-fits-all national message and national platform. I have a counterintuitive view, Richard. It's all politics is local. And if all politics is local, so should messaging be local.
Let me put you on the spot here. We have a common friend, a good friend to the show, Joe Crowley, Congressman out of Queens. He's been rumored by many people as that he'd be a great leader for the party. I know she can raise money, and I know she's got a lot of strengths and assets, but would the party be better served going into the midterms if you had a Joe Crowley who was the minority leader and potentially a speaker rather than Nancy Pelosi?
Well, first of all, I do think that Joe Crowley is a potential speaker, but I'm biased. I love him and always work closely with him. But right now, the Democrats have to focus not on a leadership election next January, but on winning the midterm election in November. And I will tell you, there is nobody who has worked harder, who raises the resources, who can deploy a mobilized field staff. There is nobody more talented and skilled on those matters than Nancy Pelosi. You know, and look, the Republicans tried to vilify her in the Connor Lamb special election in Pennsylvania in a district that they should have won without even, trying, such a Republican district. Then they saw the margins narrow and they played that old Nancy Pelosi card, and guess what? They lost. And why did they lose? Because most voters in those swing districts, they're not voting based on Nancy Pelosi or John Boehner or Joe Crowley. They're voting based on their pocketbooks. They're voting based on their future. They're voting based on their careers and their children. And inside the Beltway, politics just doesn't enter into it. So I don't get too hung up on, whether it's Pelosi or somebody else. My advice to Democrats is just talk to people about what you're going to bring them, how you're going to improve their lives, and worry about the inside the Beltway stuff in January.
The book again, Big Guns here. Former Congressman Steve Israel, thank you so much for the time, and good luck with the book.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard.
Up next, an investigative report on the supersized salaries when it comes to school superintendents and how that's impacting taxpayers in our area.